Hi, good evening, good morning, as the case may be. I am Anish, and all of us here at the first India Rural Colloquy, very warm welcome. It's Sunday, and so special and sweet to find you friends joining in. We couldn't have chosen a better day. In India, we are celebrating Friendship Day today. It connects so well with our theme at Colloquy of Forward Together. That's Excelsior Communis. The solidarity that's so important for present times. If you would have noticed, the International Olympics Committee added together, that is Communis, to the motto of CTS, Altius, Fortius, coined by Father Dijon. At the first India Rural Colloquy, we'll have a series of 12 conversations, starting today on issues that matter to rural, among and with people who, while maybe located outside the rural, and some are not located outside the rural. I see in the participant list many joining in from rural areas. The panel, the hosts, and many participants hold apart from deep understanding and a passion for rural areas and an enigmatic and paradigmatic power to shape and exercise the gravitational pull that comes to them so naturally, given their experience in different sectors, to bend rural policy and action in direction of better lives, better mobility, and making rural matter. These includes all of us, the participants and 58 friends on various colloquy panels. Together, we have the energy transfer of giving escape velocity to our villages. One of my favorite mythic stories is of Suraj ka Satwaं Ghora. Out of the 7 horses of the sun god's chariot, 6 actually follow the beaten track. The 7th one is blessed to take a new direction. It is out of box, Power's new initiative. We at TRI have the intent, urgency, and hurry, if not the resources of making a new rural. Humanity has far too long stayed unequal and unjust, wasting precious lives. In every Kalam, we have failed a Dhanuskori. In every Rajendra Prasad, we have the glacial pace of Jiradei. I come from Bihar and I know what Jiradei is today. Why rural? In operational terms, the multiple inequality cleavages across gender, class, caste, ethnicity uniquely converges with the navigational power and energy of a bazaar, samaj, sarkar on the geographic and cultural overlay of village society and its natural resources and its economy. It is to this Bharat, the progenitor of the democratic welfarist, sworn to the most progressive constitution of Indian Republic, sworn to the socio-economic equity that the colloquy will become, hopefully, the Satwaं Ghora, giving to this 2/3 of India a new direction and help all of us walk along to bridge the divide bared by those dazzling night lights that you see on Google Earth, so starkly separating the lighted from the dark. Apart from the brilliant panelists and host conversants who have very kindly and generously agreed to join us and give their precious time, our success to forge this conversation is founded in how we engage and bring all of us at the colloquy forward together in contemplation, in free exchange. Participants are key to making this conversation matter. I intend to be mostly sitting there as the colloquy unfolds. Long back, Dorothy Day, the American journalist, has said, let's talk of poverty because people insulated by their own comforts may lose sight of it. And at colloquy, we'll do just that, talk of poverty, inequality, but with an yearning, faith, optimism, hopefulness, and confidence to bring change. Why 1 to 8 August for the colloquy? August has been a special month of remembrance in our shared quest of freedom, dignity, and a better world. Ironic, given its origin, the first Emperor Augustus, who set Pax Romana, had named this month on himself. Unlike his hubris and vanity, August is truly special. He's an inspiration for all of us. The exceptional August Revolution that we commemorate with colloquy and some of those visuals that you saw in the colloquy theme song come from that August Revolution. Undoubtedly, this was history's largest mass movements of freedom and dignity. And after 1942, we never had such a mass movement. It expressed the will of the Indian people. Communities became their own leaders in quest of freedom. August is also special for India's Independence Day and countless other inspirations across the globe that independence gave to colonial countries. Starting with Friendship Day today, we have in August the Indigenous Peoples Day, Youth Day, World Humanitarian Day, the Slave Trade Abolition, and on 26th, the Women Equality Day. In this, you can see the radiance of justice, freedom, and dignity. These thoughts permeate the colloquy as we look forward. You will also find the sessions designed around these powerful ideas that can advance humanity. Well, I am no Luddite or techno-doos. My colleagues tell me this session is live on Facebook and is being live streamed at partner websites. There will be live tweets from the session. All sessions are being recorded and full videos will be available on the colloquy site. So friends, do spread the word around and get friends to watch, comment, ask, and share the conversation. This is all about we. What we make of these conversations is for us. Our intent during curation was to get us into conversation that makes for effective, productive, and transformative outcomes. We wish the colloquy to contribute in a small way, making the world a better place. There is an old saying, one good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. But that will need all of us together, whether we are speaking or listening, to get inspired, get connected, being imaginative and creative. On housekeeping, at any time during the session, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions to the panelists. We are running a campaign for video submissions also on questions to the panelists. During the session, actually, you could type your questions into Q&A, which is at the bottom of your control panel. As time allows, the panelists will address as many questions that they can. In chats, we'll share any information related to the session and will encourage you to share ideas, opinion, materials related to the topic. You can also react by sending a digital thumbs up or claps to communicate without interrupting the session. The first session, let me come to that, is truly special, not because many of us like crystals and it's about crystal ball gauging, but in Bharti, Sanjiv, Venkat, we have thought leaders uniquely bringing the symphony of bazaar, samaj, sarkar from their different vantage positions in a shared, passionate quest for just and equitable society. There couldn't be a better panel to talk on what the wow I describe as windows to opportunities world hold for rural India. And I'm sure across the practitioners, development administrators, policymakers, donors interested in rural and rural-urban transitions, this is your wow panel. You have a futurist in Venkat, always ahead of the curve. Once while I was taking stock with him, I was humbled to realize together with him at helm of Tata Trust, we had pushed some breathtaking ideas in development sector. And he was completely new to development sector coming from a corporate world. Say, for example, the target of 100,000 annual income. And that was a six-fold increase over what the best of the livelihood NGOs were aiming for then. Multidimensional change overlay in the same geography, which became the idea of TRI. Nudge human resources in government systems, the Swachh Bharat Preraks and later the aspirational districts that we at TRI did. These have been sector-defining ideas and have altered the development landscape. Venkat, you did a lot in your brief stint with the development sector. In his fertile, always bubbling, imaginative mind, he has many more ideas. We'll hear them today. In Sanjiv, you have the realist, passionate development thinker who has watched many summers go by and so is well placed to easily spot that swallow which doesn't make for summer. Deep optimist, he can hold forth on any domain and is so well organized mindware to retrieve the right reference, the right book for the right theory and the right practice. He knows more about how individuals and communities advance or remain stuck. We'll hear from him around these issues. Bharti brings in an exceptional experience from the world of corporates and markets and the best and the most enviable ringside view of development sector with some of the leading development organizations like Pradhan Basics emerging, so to say, from her kitchen. We are at TRIF are blessed to have all three on our advisory board and in conversation with dear Soumitra. This sure is going to be a crackling conversation and we will get a handle on the VUCA post-pandemic world, the surge in technology, climate change, youth bulge, habitat, and the vulnerabilities of new job trends, skills to make us tomorrow ready. There is, I must say to our dear panelists and host, there is a palpable urgency that we feel as we work on in the villages, palpable urgency, enthusiasm, frustration, and energy in rural India to get ahead. Without much ado, over to you, Somitra. Help us open our third eyes, that Jyoti Punj of illumination and can-do spirit. Over to you, Somitra.
Thank you, Anish. Namaste, everyone. Good evening, good morning, where you are. I see about 200 plus people have joined, so I just wanted to share this quote from Margaret Mead, right? Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has had changed the world, right? So, I mean, it's a great way to start with 200 people coming here for this conversation on a Sunday evening. Anish and the TRIF team, we want to congratulate you on a great 8 days of sessions. I've gone through the calendar, fantastic sessions coming up, great, and I'm sure they will be enriching and invigorating conversations. Just for the audience, what we are covering today or over the next 8 days spans multiple sectors. So we will be speaking about agriculture, we're speaking about universal healthcare, we are talking about various population groups, be it the women, be it the aspirations of the youth, and the role various people in, and technologies that can play in actually creating a just and resilient and vibrant rural scape. What me and the panel today, as we are kicking on this off, will focus on and try and focus on meta issues that certainly are relevant to the individual sectors, and we will cover those in greater detail, but are applicable cross sectors, right? So the idea today for this session is twofold. One is really help with the help of Bharti, Sanjiv, and Venkat. As you know, I'm sure all of us are optimists, right? There are a lot of challenges, but if 200 people have turned up on a Sunday evening, there is a sense of optimism. So we will basically see, if we were to look at 2030 and imagine the rural scape in the future, what that will look like. And the other is be a precursor to some of the other events, and we hope to spark some thoughts and be a teaser for the future events. So with that, I will dive into the session. One Q&A point, so one rather housekeeping point. Please put the Q&A in the Q&A box and not the chat box. And please keep firing away. It will give me a sense of how many questions are there. And the idea is to spend, the balanced time on conversations with these three great individuals. As there are more questions, I will try and get them in and, keep more time for the Q&A, at the end. So with that, let me dive straight into the first question, right? I mean, if the three of you, if you were to, paint a picture of what the rural scape would look maybe, 10, 12 years from now in say 2030, I mean, what would it look like? And what are your aspirations for the rural India, which even in 2030, despite urbanization, there's a question on urbanization, which we'll cover, will have more than 60% of our people living. So we'll go around the virtual room, so to say. Sanjeev, can I invite you to maybe get us started, if that's okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Soumitra. Thank you, Anish, for organizing this. And I'm very, very happy that so many people have shown interest and have joined this conversation on a Sunday afternoon. Coming to your question about what would India look like, I'll try and be brief. In my view, there are four major, one is looking into a crystal ball, so to say. So four major things which I see happening by the year 2030. And some of their kind of curtains have been raised, and we see already trends happening in that direction and so on. The first, I think, and that will be pretty revolutionary in the sense that a large restructuring of economic activities will need to be done. And that is the proliferation and dominance of the platform-based services, platform-based solutions for a large number of rural issues. One already sees this. When we had the other day's conversation in Bihar of all the places, and there was a demand that why don't we have Uber-like services for tractor hiring and Uber-like services for harvesters and threshers and weeding equipment and stuff like that. So I do see, and I'm sure the market may not be ripe yet, but there will be entrepreneurial spirit which will provide this kind of solution. And I see a platform-like solution coming up that I got my cotton crop, it needs to be, pesticides need to be spread, and this is the pesticide I want, and I click it, and somebody comes and does it, and like it can be done in many other platform-based solutions. So I see this as a major development happening, and therefore the new kinds of employment. So the old traditional Krishi Kranti Kendra kind of people having to transform themselves into kind of platform-based service providers and so on. So this is one change. The second, which I think is a continuation of the trend, and that is intensification and proliferation across the country of both feminization and senilization of agriculture. By feminization, I mean the amount of work that needs to be done in agriculture will be more and more done by women, as it has been already done. I think something like 70% of the work gets done by women, but I think this proportion is slated only to go up and not down. And that's unfortunate for the women because they may have only the work and no control over the money. So therefore, a corresponding social change in the family structure and family decision-making power will be needed. It will happen over a period of time. The transition is at the senilization because younger people are migrating. Whoever is left, already the average age of a farmer is above 50 or above 45 or something. So that's likely to go up further. So these are the two. And this would have implications for marketing and stuff like that. Marketing of agri-input, marketing of rural produce and so on. The third change, which I think is, and this is a subject which will come, and Anish keeps talking about it, emergence of a real large number of big or very big villages or market towns. So the gradual merging of the rural into urban or urban, I don't know which word to use, because they may not acquire all the traits of urban if you follow the census definition and so on. And finally, I hope, and this is more a hope, but I think there's also a hope based on my assessment of what's likely to happen, particularly because of platforms like Amazon and so on, is the distributed manufacturing, at least of the consumer goods. No, at least all these your Hariram Sev and all those kinds of items are likely to be manufactured in many more places and distributed via these platforms. In the process, creating employment at the village level. These are the four changes which I see. I think I'll stop here.
Sanjiv, let me stay with you if you don't mind. And if these four changes, let's assume and hope they happen, right? What would the life of a rural youth say in 2030? I mean, what are the 2-3 differences or of the women in the villages? How would that be different if you were to imagine?
Yeah, let's look at, let's paint a positive picture first. If the youth or the women are proactive and are able to capture the opportunity, they could be participants in this distributed manufacturing. They could be, at the least, they could be the delivery boys and girls. But that, I think, is the lowest end job in the whole process. But I think they would be participants in the distributed manufacturing. And they would have got rid of much of the drudgery. If you get the platform-based services for pesticide spray or things like that, then you don't have to get into inhale all that poison. So there may be positive changes like that. The negative changes, of course, is agriculture is going to be feminized and menfolk are migrating to the cities. Then women do become a little more vulnerable, because they have their physiology, they have their and besides they are women, and I don't think India has demonstrated itself to be particularly kind to women in recent years. So that sort of an issue will need to be looked at. So these are the. I didn't expect that question, but these are the immediate responses which I have.
No, but I think, thanks. You basically painted that there is a lot of opportunity. There are economic opportunities which women, youth, and other disadvantaged communities. We can, we don't have enough time, but we can talk about tribals and minorities and all that. Sure. So opportunities will be there, but there are certain inequities that we need to be taking care of, which we have not done well in the past. So I think, Sanjiv, thanks for that. And
Right.
sorry, I followed up a question which you were not expecting, but I think that's the fun of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Bharti, Venkat, which of, I mean, whoever wants to go next.
Bharti, go ahead.
Okay. So same question, Shamitra, or something else?
Yeah. I mean, I want all three of you to, kind of paint that picture, and maybe then I'll have a follow up.
Okay. So let me try and paint. Follow Sanjiv and painting my dream picture rather than my nightmare picture. So the dream picture is this. The village I go to has a pakka road. It has pakka houses. The women, are healthy. The average hemoglobin levels for the women is 13 plus. We have a situation in which the young people, people over 15, are, a quarter of them are somewhere in a college in a nearby area. A quarter of them are learning new technologies and new skills that will make them employable in all these platform type services that Sanjiv was talking about. Another quarter has actually gone off for higher studies to colleges which are further away. And then there's another quarter which is working in the fields with the parents and is somewhat optimistic about the future. The positive picture that I can also paint is that you are looking at education and healthcare as vastly improved from where it is today. You are looking also at a very proactive management of climate change, as well as of managing the environment from an ecological as well as a pollution point of view. So that's a lot of positive thought. Will it happen? I don't know, but we all need to put our heads together to think about how to make at least some of it come true. And I'm hoping the colloquy will do just that, to try and see what really needs to get addressed.
Bharti, thanks. So, I mean, you've painted it quite vividly, this picture with maybe just a few, and I'm sure if we give you time, you can put down 500 metrics, but I think, very simple, very elegantly, you've kind of painted this. One thing which, and I'll just be a little bit, I'll play the devil's advocate here. So you clearly, for me, these talk about, prosperity and, and happiness and health. And what about equity? What's your best case, view on equity? Especially, it could be for women, tribals, the Dalits. Is that not a part of what what you imagine 2030 to look like? And I'm sorry, I'm just being provocative here.
No, I think it's good to be provocative, but even in my dreams, I don't expect 3,000 years of social history to get wiped out in 10 years. We are in 2021 right now. We are talking 2030. The Varna system started sometime after the Aryas came into India. And actually not sometime, significantly long time after they came in, but it's been there for over 2,000 years. I think it's at the bottom of a lot of our ills, but that is a separate conversation, and I've mentioned to you before. I think in 10 years, we will not see this go away. The question that I think we need to ask ourselves is, I mean, it really surprises me that it's not a part of the discourse. It's not something that we talk about when we talk about the change that we need. So I think that is something that I'm hoping will begin to get into the discourse, that we start thinking about how our social silos and our social inequity, whether it is amongst ourselves as people, whether it's caste or religion or gender, how that is actually stymieing a lot of what we want to get done. So I think the best in my dreams that I imagine is that over the next 10 years, anything we think about doing, we will take this into account and we will try to figure out how we are going to address it. And I'm hoping that at the school level, we will begin to try and address it more consciously.
Thank you, Bharti. Venkat, you want to add to that, or
yeah, thanks.
You even have a very different view of some of these things.
No, I think Sanjiv and Bharti have made my job a lot more easier in terms of collating and or framing thoughts. First of all, congrats and compliments to Anish, Anirban, and the rest of the TRI team for my first interaction with Anish and Anirban. I don't know, Bharti, whether you remember the board meeting when I was nominated by Trust to be there. One of the comments which I don't know who made was that I was corporatizing the development sector. So nice to learn after a decade that look, a few things did work and I didn't so much corporatize the development sector. But it's been a great learning and a humbling experience in making provocative suggestions, and B, learning that some of the provocative suggestions have been taken far too seriously to go ahead and achieve what they've achieved over the past decade or so. Congrats and compliments, Anish, to each and every one of you. If one were to reimagine or reorient what 2030 will be, quite frankly, one may or should not see any distinction between a rural or an urban. It is, as our Honorable Prime Minister also says, it's an Ek Bharat, Shresth Bharat. And if you talk about individuals or institutions, one of the most profitable institution ever in history of corporations as Berkshire Hathaway. Omaha can get as rural as it can get. Been in there for 40 or 50 odd years, still an extremely successful company, literally over a couple of generations, so to speak. What we've been discussing offline with Bharti on what would it take to remove those equities that exist. And while we might say we are a land of equal opportunity and all are one, my dear son type of constructs, deep within us, there are a number of iniquities, at times insensitivities too. And it goes on, whether in rural or urban, unless we give a place of prominence to women in the society. Incidentally, the 2 medals, just now I've heard that one more medal has come for India from Sindhu in badminton, where we don't celebrate one medal once in a day or once in 4 years type of stuff. We really, in 10 years' time, are at a place of prominence in proportion to our population. If we're number 2 in population and medal tally, we should ideally be number 2 in 10 years' time. The reason why I say this is sports also in many ways breaks down several barriers. Bharti, if you recall, when Nelson Mandela took over, when the rugby match was played, that was a very momentous occasion where he went into the stands and supported literally the all-whites team of this thing. And that became a very defining moment in the country's history to break down several barriers. And in our own way, all of us in some point of time or the other, unless we make a conscious choice to make that change and not necessarily say it with a sense of lip service alone, ranging from the politicians to each and every one of us. Suppose if chief ministers are decided on the basis of majority caste, or election seats are distributed on quote unquote winnability of which territory exists, we're not giving or making this land as a equal opportunity entity. So what one would hope and expect is institutions like TRI and many of the partner and development organizations that all of us have been directly or indirectly been associated, look at it with a different sense of equity. both in gender, diversity, and geography, and not leave it to the haves and have-nots, which in many ways, while COVID has done a lot of great things, technology also has, as we all have read and seen, increased the disparities much more than what one can have access to, even in terms of simple education. Like say, when you talk of a webinar, if we take a count of 236 people odd on this particular webinar, how many people are actually attending the webinar from a quote unquote rural setting? That itself is a good indicator of the extent of divide or the digital divide that has exacerbated in this pandemic. So these are some of the questions which I would sincerely hope Anirban, Anish, and rest of the TRI team looks at it from a framing perspective. And as one of the comments also came in, when you go to places like Sri Lanka or Kerala or Goa, there is no rural or urban. They might still think that they are rural or urban, but it's a very seamless, integrated structure. But it has to be in letter and spirit, not necessarily in rhetoric alone. And many of the things that Bharti said, roof over a head, women above a BMI of X and nutrition levels of Y, and hemoglobin count of Z, looking at addressing many of the chronic diseases. There was a paper by a leading researcher in Chhattisgarh, Yogesh Jain. Women or rural India also has certain chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, COPD. It's not the urban malaise alone. So are we spending adequate attention to rural healthcare? COVID has shown that viruses like COVID don't discriminate between president of a country to a peon in a government office. Exactly behave the same way. So in that sense, how do we look at equity in a lot more sharper framework? Also from the view of gender, as Sanjiv pointed out, if 70% of rural India is going to be based on women working in rural, are all our tools and techniques gender oriented, whether the weight of an axe or a weight of a sickle, it's still too much male dominated, so to speak. So I'll just pause here and request comments from Sanjiv, Bharti, or you.
So Venkat, thank you. I think a couple of things, right? One, just highlighting that, of course, we need social infrastructure, we need prosperity, but for a society to be just equitable and happy, right? Things like sports, arts, culture also are important. So I think the point about, Sindhu, and thanks for sharing the news. I think the match started at 5 when we were kicking this off. So I think that's great. One thing that you also mentioned is this, at least in my mind, sometimes I have that binary of rural versus urban. And there was, I think, one question also, right? And I think Sanjiv, you also kind of alluded to it, saying that there will be large villages with markets, right? So maybe like it is an audience question, and it was about Delhi, but if you were to extend this, right, how do you see that, evolution, right? It's not going to be overnight moving from, a village to an urban. And Bharti, I would want to get you in, and, I've seen your TED talk on how we are building bad urban centers, right, which are ugly. So let me, let's take that question, and then we will move to questions of inequity and how do we address them.
So unfortunately, most Indian cities are morphed villages. And we probably have one or two planned cities in the country at the moment. Chandigarh is one of them. And I'm talking about post-independence. And I think maybe one or two other cities. So you're pretty much talking about villages morphing into towns and towns morphing into cities. And we do a terrible, terrible job of them. I think what Sanjiv was talking about perhaps was more the fact that there is a continuum. There is a continuum between rural and urban, which is evident in some states already. So if you go to Punjab, Western Rajasthan, bits of Haryana, bits of Andhra, lots of Maharashtra, you will already find continuums. There are ribbon developments along highways, and there is really not much difference between a between where a village boundary ends and a town boundary starts, because it's sort of like a haphazard development along the way. What that does is it has a lot of implications for what we do in terms of infrastructure, what we do in terms of services, how we count things. Now, of course, it's a completely different matter again, but the way in which we call something rural and call something urban, we haven't changed those definitions in years. There seems to be a huge amount of I guess interest in a bunch of people to try and call something rural rather than make it urban, because then you get a municipal corporation and there are lots of issues involved with that. So I think there's a whole set of things which need to get addressed in terms of how resources have to be allocated and what infrastructure has to be built. But we do have we really need to anticipate this rural urban continuum and what it means for the services which need to be provided, both physical and social infrastructure. And by social, I mean things like schools and healthcare, and physical, of course, is the usual, sadak pani type of stuff, bijli. So I think that is something which if we don't take it into account, it's really going to get worse and worse, because you will not have sewage in these large morph towns that Sanjiv is talking about, because we don't have sewage lines in large cities even today. So, this is stuff that has to be planned for. And when you see a village morphing into a town, you've got to begin to start thinking about some of the stuff which, which is really, really critical.
Yeah. So thank you. I think it's maybe a good time to segue into talking about really what is, and we started some of it in terms of inequities and what's held us back. Right. So despite all our optimism, if we were to look back since independence and close to 75 years now, we made progress for sure. But I think, the pace of progress, the quantum of change, the pace is not what, we had envisaged, right? If you look around us, be it Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, of course, China is, on some counts, not on all, has, stolen the march, right? So what are some of the, the meta level challenges, right, that have kind of held us back? So one, clearly, and since it was highlighted already, one is patriarchy. Two is the Varna system. What are the one or two more? And maybe if you disagree with any of these, Sanjiv, Venkat, please do share your view. And also, how do we address them, right? So the question is really, what are the structural issues which have held us back, right? And I just gave a couple of examples. And what do we do to address them? And you started that conversation, Bharti, about not expecting it to be wiped off by 2030. But I think, I do believe we can make a beginning.
Okay. Shall I try and address your question? Some of them, at least.
Yeah,
in my view, the two things which are rather macro, kind of all encompassing, which probably need societal level response. The first is that we are a very peculiar nation where almost everybody feels that he is wrong. Almost everybody feels that he is wronged, that something wrong has been done to him, that he is suffering some injustice. Now, this is a terrible situation. Everybody, it's not only the Dalit who feels that. It's the, on Facebook you see so many posts which say that my son got 95% marks and he did not get into this, and what kind of a system is this and all that. So everybody is feeling I'm wrong. Now this kind of a victimhood, assumed victimhood by everybody, I don't think augurs very well for positive mindset and so on. Now, of course, there are social ills which need to be addressed and so on and so forth. One thing that probably has, now that is very deep back in the past, even before I was born, but I'm sure many of you have read Amartya Sen's India and its contradictions, Uncertain Glory. And he points out very vividly that what has happened wrong at the beginning of the nation was complete neglect of the elementary education and the rural health systems. And he makes quite a whole chapter is devoted to that. And that has had the health and education neglect in the beginning has had a sort of cascading effect. And that the more urgently you look at it, the earlier the malice will be, of course, now things have gone well beyond a very easy control because now, the public education system is kind of attracting less and less students in many places, though it seems to have no differential in quality of education as per ASER reports compared to what they call the private school. But still, people do prefer to go to private schools, particularly if their name is Saint so and so or whatever, So that's the kind of, so basically health and education is one. The second, I think, is all very macro kind of thing is that we still remain what Gunnar Marder called a soft state. He termed this in the Asian drama in 1955 or whenever it was published. He termed India as a soft state because we just don't seem to get things done, and with a kind of German kind of sense of efficiency and finish. So whether we continue to be that or whether we don't, now opinions may differ and may differ on partisan lines and so on. But the fact is that we are a soft state, and therefore we don't address an issue quite thoroughly. Now you have this right now chaotic situation where two states, police forces are fighting with each other at the border of that state. Now this unimaginably, if I may say, unimaginably ridiculous. And yet we don't see the central government stepping in and saying, stop this nonsense. This is the kind of indication of a soft state. So we need to convert ourselves from the soft state into, and last point, and I'm sure, absolutely certain I'm not going to be the most popular guy after I say this, and that is that we have far too much emphasis on rights and virtually no emphasis on responsibilities. In the public discourse, everybody talks about rights of this, rights of that, rights of the other, but nobody's talking about what is the responsibility. We forget that the Constitution of India has, and that's among the very few good things that happened during emergency. The Article 51A was introduced, and they talked of fundamental duties of the citizens. But even this comes as a news to people, that there is a section, an article called fundamental duties. Leave alone knowing what those duties are, and leave alone knowing that performing those duties is the word duty means if I am a citizen, I ought to do it. So this sense of responsibility is drowned under the flood of social discourse focusing on rights. But these are the few things that we need to kind of correct before many things can happen. I think I'll stop there.
Great, Sanjiv. Thanks. And just one clarification: when you said too much focus on rights, it's at the individual level. It's not the rights-based approach for development, right? I mean, just wanted to clarify that.
No.
As an individual, I'm focusing on rights and not on my duties. Is that what you're saying?
And encouraged by the rights-based values. Very strongly encouraged by the rights-based values. The same rights-based values also were to kind of focus and drill down onto social responsibility. That would have been a much better situation.
Great. Thanks, Sanjiv. Venkat, could I invite you to add, and then we will round up with Bharti?
In this, Soumitra, what also might be important in this context is for each and every one of us, whether an organization and or an individual, to set out something which might appear or not might appear, shall appear as a seemingly impossible goal when we undertake a particular task or put something ahead of us. People should think that, look, it's just not possible. There are enough and more illustrations to this effect. If anyone in 2001 or 2002 would have thought Narendra Modi would have been Prime Minister of the country, that too for a second term, people would have said, look, you're half mad, you need to get your head checked. And until even 2013, there is a famous photograph of just before the Goa convention where Mr. Nitin Gadkari, Rajnath Singh and Mr. L.K. Advani were sitting, and the Prime Minister to be was standing beside them with this bending 1 foot or down below. But at the same time, to give credit to him, after he won his third term in election, very clear that he wanted to see a new India. and he did not care about who came in between, whether they were his own mentors or advisors or whomsoever it. And he at an individual became an institution, and which in turn led whatever it did to propel him to a record second term as well. While we may not agree to some of the things, of course, everyone is entitled to our views or not views, but the courage and conviction to take on something despite whatever odds that might appear to be in one form or the other helped him or her to get to where it is. That is one. Second, when we also mentioned this about the rural construct, historically we ourselves, and Anish will allude to this, we have always been in a kind of command and control. Look, I know something, I'm coming and telling you what is good for you, please take it. Whereas thanks to information asymmetry, which is kind of getting completely obliterated, if we show some humility to say that, look, you guys are the bosses, is there any way that we can be supportive of your ambition to tell me what you want to do or don't do? In many ways, the conversation relating to TRI started off on one woman in a remote village in Jharkhand saying, look, boss, I want my children to be like y'all. One guy turning up and saying, mujhe shirt pant ka kheti karna hai. If you come and tell me how to do a shirt pant ka kheti, I will tell you. Otherwise, thank you. You be where you want, Pradhan Bhai. If I need anything, I have your number. I'll give you a call. It was as blunt, brutal and direct as what it can be. So in many ways, we would also, both as donor organizations and as foundations / implementing partners, be humble enough, bold enough to take literally a disproportionate extent of risk. In most cases, what happens in a development paradigm is, you yourself know, and you have seen a lot of things. I'll say, look, show me a proof of concept where it has worked. Get me a theory of change, write down 20 parameters. If we go and get stuck up with all of this, you will never see a transformational change. You might still see significant change. I'm not denying that it won't happen or not happen, but we are often hold our own biases as compared to what is in that context. When people like Mackenzie Scott and others come up with kind of unrestricted grants, it's really a boon to the sector. And Tata Trust earlier used to give people cost to a significant extent rather than the program cost. Find good people. Pradhan historically started off on that context. So how do we identify the best and the brightest people? Even Jamshedji Tata in 1892 was, first trust was based on that premise as well. So how do we show some humility in acknowledging the needs and aspirations of rural India and say that, look, we are more a facilitator in our journey. How do we enable them to attempt to achieve their seemingly impossible goal, so to speak?
So Venkat, very quickly, I just wanted to follow up on the first point. So, I heard you say 3 points. One is how philanthropy can and should support, i.e. take risks. 2 is our goals are, the first one was goals were not aspirational enough. And 3, not community led, right? I mean, very centralized. I know the answers and stuff like that. On the first one, like, why are we not aspirational enough? Is it lack of success? Is it lack of confidence? What is it like? Why are we not setting aspirational goals as a society?
In many ways, Bharti's article, or maybe I'm biased because recently I read it and she's been interacting offline on it. The Macaulay system and the British have left, but we have not left British traits. Even a conversation and a colloquy like this, we are talking in the Queen's language. No, ideally speaking, we should have done it in a regional language or in Tamil, or I would have learned my Tamil a little better than what many things would be. We have somehow not left that emperor's clothes, so to speak. So in that sense, unless we challenge those notions, we'll never get anywhere. We'll still get to what it is. And Anish, we had this conversation. Like say, it might appear seemingly impossible. Actually not. We need to start somewhere, right? If you go to China, whatever one might say, the guy might speak perfect English, but you will not hear anything other than Chinese. Or in many of the European or Scandinavian nations, they speak their Flemish or Danish or Swedish, as the case might be. Whereas for some reason, South Asian nations or Asian nations or low and middle income nations are still so much indebted to the Queen, so to speak. So we need to leapfrog that and get that aspirational In many ways, one can't while it might sound as a very crude statement, when our Honorable Prime Minister once said, look, I'm not interested in Harvard, I'm interested in hard work. So in that sense, we need to get over that mindset as, look, somebody has said something, I need to follow. How do we encourage people to lead? How do we enable them to be outstanding individuals first, and then therefore they become, you see, even in our own Olympics, we are seeing people unknown from unheard villages coming to the Olympic stage. It's not easy to be an Olympian, leave alone win a medal. But how many people knew of those people? Or maybe Sindhu might have been in, last time she won, so many people would have been aware of it. But the boxer or the silver medalist in weightlifting, how many people would have even realized that? And all of them, it took a generation of a Karna Malleshwari to produce this. It took a Vishwanathan Anand to get many people to do and take up chess in such a big way. So how do we encourage the plethora of opportunities which lie in front of us? End of the day, there are only 2 nations which have 1 billion plus, and therefore it's an opportunity for us to transform millions of people's life. Not just, we don't get such an opportunity in Africa, we don't get an opportunity in Europe or South America. So in that sense, we are uniquely placed to shift the needle much bigger and bolder. So, and our main constraint is what? A, execution ability, B is capital. So in that sense, platforms like TRIF can help to shape the execution process, and with a collaboration or a colloquium of a like-minded people, which entities like yourselves can collate and curate, can transform the capital structure as well in the way we deal with.
Thanks, Venkat. And I mean, very quickly before, and we'll come to you, Bharti. I mean, one of the highest points in my life as I was growing up was India winning the World Cup in '83, not the last one, 2011 or whatever. And people were criticizing Kapil Dev's English. I mean, so I think, it was not, I remember it. I was quite young then, but you made that point very well. Bharti, what would you add, and to this?
So I think, I agree with everything that Sanjiv and Venkat have said. I think maybe a couple of things. The first one is, if we can come up with some way in which we can help our young people change their aspiration from wanting a job, particularly a government job, as the acme of their, of their potential, I think that would be a big thing. Because really, the entire, government jobs are very limited. For every 100 people who want a job, lakhs apply. It's not like thousands, it's lakhs who apply. It's just a bummer, to be wanting something that in any case is not going to happen. So, but that seems to be everybody's aspiration. So if we can actually somehow get people to grow up to think they are not looking at a government job to begin with, maybe then they look around and say, there are not those many jobs around. So what can I do, which may not be a job? How will I earn my livelihood? I think if that is something we can start to do through, whether it is schools, through, NGO efforts, through corporate efforts, through government efforts, I think that would be a huge important thing. The second one is actually, our constitution and our legislatures have, put in place this third layer of government, which I think all of us had lots and lots of hopes of. And somehow we just, that hope has not been realized. And if we can, in 10 years is not that short a time to make that happen. If we can actually pull out all stops to let that function, going back to what Venkat was saying, let people decide what they want to do, let these institutions play the role they're meant to play under the constitution. Maybe that is something that would, result in, the appropriate allocation of resources, whether it is to education or healthcare or to roads, to the appropriate ways of looking at things. I think it's really, really important that we pay attention to this. And then I think the third one is again something that I think everybody can do, whether it's the corporate sector or the government or NGOs. How do we, start role modeling an entrepreneurial way of life? How do we get every child to think that, I'm going to go and invent something, I'm going to go and do something? Is that something we can try and do? Because at the end of the day, leadership is not an abstract thing. Leadership in the context that we are talking about is about saying, I see a problem, I see an opportunity, I'm going to figure out a way to deal with this. And I think from whatever I've read and whatever I've seen, it is possible to do it. It requires a lot of doing, but it is possible to do it. So I would say, in addition to everything that's been said before me, those three things.
Excellent. And I think these are great points, and couple of things. So I just, for everyone, not for the three of you, so we spoke about, of course, patriarchy. We spoke about issues in terms of how to fire the aspirations of the youth. So, for the audience, there's some great sessions coming up. I think there is a session on women collectives and rural empowerment. On the 3rd, there's one on harnessing the power of youth, which is, I think, more around mass entrepreneurship and stuff like that. So I think a lot of these, of course, the panelists can speak more about it, but we have limited time. So I think we'll deep dive into some of those. I think there's one on the, on how the third level of government and how the locality, development compacts can actually help create a more sustainable, equitable, and just change. So I think a lot of that coming up, and I'm glad, the thoughts here match, because of course Anish and team came up with this agenda without having the benefit of this conversation, but I think it kind of ties in. So as they say, watch this space for more details and more conversations. Very quickly, there are a lot of questions. So one last question to all of you, and maybe I'll just limit it to what are the 2 green shoots that you see that give you confidence in terms of reaching, the rural scape vision that we'd painted in the beginning? And what could, either the government or philanthropy, do to kind of, cultivate those green shoots into something which is bigger and more impactful? And then we will take the audience questions. Yeah.
If I may start, Soumitra, what one is seeing and one is very heartened by this is these are the days of hyper collaboration. And instead of a project or a program, how do initiatives work as a platform? So, and it is really heartening to see both at the donor community as well as the civil society really looking at ways and means of working together, not just in letter, but in spirit of association as well. In the past, as you know, if a program officer of one institution says X, I can tell in all humility, even in the Tata Trust, before we had that common nomenclature of Tata Trust, if a guy got rejected at Gaurav Tata Trust, Ratan Tata Trust will approve and vice versa. So it used to be that way. But whereas we have migrated and shifted that both internally as well as with a multi-sector or rather a multi-foundational collaboration mechanisms too. And also it's also heartening to see many new age or new generation collaborators like Give India is not new generation anymore. They've been almost for close to a decade, or the Nudge collaboration or Encore, or even platforms like ACT grants, which have come out in a big way. Many new generation
or maybe Co-Impact,
Co-Impact,
if you would consider, because there are Indians on that platform.
Yeah, Indians on. So it is heartening to see hyper collaborative networks coming into the space, and not many of them who come in, they're not constrained by past legacies of what they do. Obviously, they have their own ways of engaging, like in this space, or two individuals, we may or may not agree on everything that they set out to achieve or don't achieve. But the intent of solving a societal problem, one needs to give credit to that portion of what they desire to do or don't do. So in that sense, one would say seeing those green shoots, not just in India but globally, are very interesting to see the hyper collaborative nature of engagement, and that I would take away as a significant positive, so to speak, in otherwise a very sanguine environment.
Thank you.
Yes. So far as I'm concerned, the green shoots that I look at, and that's much good work that's been done by my colleagues in TRI, connects with the agency of the communities getting ignited during COVID. So they do look after, they do manage their own affairs. The government has no capacity to reach many of these places, but yet they do manage to quarantine the fellows and look after them. And, and the second thing is the technology has been put to, excellent use, and women in rural areas have recognized how they can use that technology. I mean, it would have been inconceivable 3 years back had you told that SSG Federation meetings were going on Zoom. Nobody would have believed it. But now, dozens, if not scores, if not hundreds of meetings of rural women are going today on Zoom platform. They've come up to speed. Now, these are the green shoots, and we need to build on them. So, this technology thing is one equalizer, which destroys the differences by caste and community, etc., because it makes things so easy and so accessible to everybody. These are the two green shoots which I would talk about. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think I would say collaboration, technology are in some ways two sides of the same coin. I think technology is definitely making some changes and has the potential to do a lot more. It's a massive equalizer. It is also a massive divider, as Venkat pointed out at the beginning of his talk, that it can actually make our deep divisions worse. But it has the potential to be very large. And the interesting thing is that a lot of people like us, have actually gone off and into remote areas during COVID, after having discovered that the telecom network in those areas is sometimes even better than in the metros. So if we now have mobility access and we have technology in the remotest parts of the country, then I think that is it's just a gold mine which we need to try and figure out how to mine, which is really, really important. I think the other thing that I see, and it's sort of in some ways very it's very, very, very timid right now, is I think we are seeing more rural women actually having discovered what is possible, being very entrepreneurial. And I get engaged with a few NGOs, and it's fascinating to watch these women who've become, like a Pashu Sakhi or a Swast Sakhi or an Asha worker or an agri entrepreneur. I mean, you watch them and the confidence that they exhibit in making presentations to you and in telling you what's happened and in how it's changed their lives, it is incredible. So I think that with the exposure and the technology, a lot of people, men and women, will actually start to take some leadership role. They obviously need to be supported, but I think the potential, human potential is there, and that's that's what makes this engagement worth it.
Bharti, if I remember correctly, you are also in some way involved or mentoring frontier markets. And when you spoke about all these, is that correct? And if so, are there any stories from that cohort, like, when you speak about women's entrepreneurship. If not, then maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought you were involved with them.
No, I'm not. I'm not involved with them. No. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
But there are, I mean, Anish and Anirban can tell you lots and lots of stories. Yeah, I mean, there are many, and they're very heartening. And actually, maybe what we should do, Anish and Anirban, is to put out some of those videos on your website, because they're very, very inspiring. Very inspiring.
So I think fantastic. I think we're doing well in terms of time. The couple of questions I had, but I think there are 20 odd from the audience. So we will take those now. And some of them have been quite answered. What I'll also do is there are some questions which may be, already answered or are probably too detailed and would get covered in the following session. So we might skip some of those. I think we've had this, question on technology, which we've kind of answered. The one thing about a follow-up on that is, technology is certainly a great enabler, and it's something which we cannot, avoid or ignore. And yet it could also, I mean, I think one of you spoke about the digital divide, right? So how do we kind of manage that, or at least, reduce the impact of that? It's certainly it's a great enabler.
Sumitra, sorry to jump into answering that question.
Yeah,
that's Venkat answered that partly, and we did a research on this subject about 3 years back about digital inclusion, and one major thing which discourages digital inclusion is our what I call perverse colonial snobbery of the English language. Any number of websites, any number of operators are using only English, and people who are, digital inclusion doesn't need English inclusion. That let's be very clear. Let's separate technology from the language. So that's one major problem. So if that were to be removed, then a large number of people would stand to benefit. So you are asking what is it that digital divide would reduce significantly if necessarily mandatorily, if the digital service providers were to be, or whoever is using the digital platforms were required to have multi-language interface with the consumer.
So then I think, Sanjiv, what we need is entrepreneurs who's, who think vernacular. And we then need funding to support those vernacular entrepreneurs. Because what happens is, there's some fantastic platforms which are being evolved right now, which could be great for, making sure that this digital sort of divide does not happen. But, the first language of all these people is English, unfortunately. And so therefore, when they come to you, and I've sat in through a lot of those, investment pitches, the first piece they develop is in English. And then say, once we've got to a certain level, we will go vernacular. And I'm saying, well, actually, the application is in the vernacular. So you really need to start with that. But it's not, I think a lot of work has to be done in trying to figure out how we identify and support entrepreneurs who are...
I partially agree, but also disagree, because I think there's this snobbery really. We don't think that somebody is good because if he can't speak English or he can't do something in English, then he's not good. That's the first kind of bias we have. And second bias which the sellers have is that somebody is not worth catering to if he can't operate my English website. He is not a good enough customer to he can't use my English website. So snobbery operates both ways, in the buyers and the sellers, both. And I think that is completely to be eliminated. And small countries like Denmark and so on have shifted to their language. Why can't we do that? Come on. It just needs a collective will. When I was making this point, when I was presenting this research 3 years back in our conference, chairman of one of the companies called Mastic, Ashank Desai, he was chairing that session. And what Ashank told me was that, Google is coming up with very effective translations and soon that there will be no issue connected with that. But I still see, if I want to look at the share price of, let's say, TCS, then Google gives me a translation TCS Sahara price. Just read. If you don't believe me, just go to the website and see. So that's the level of Google translations. How long are we going to depend on Google translations for solving our problems? I think we need to make a collective will and say, look, I mean, we are not going to allow this. We are going to shift to regional languages so that more people can participate. But the trouble is this: you and me profit by this English novel. We can maintain our Brahminhood, our Pandithood, our superiority, because we have had the benefit of English education, and it's so comforting. We don't want to give it up. Let's look into ourselves. We don't want to give it up.
Sanjiv, you're spot on. If we really are courageous and bold enough, at least as a trigger, the next few sessions or even starting now from our sessions, we might have a debate of whether it is Hindi or X or Y or Z. Why not have this entire colloquy in regional language or any of the regional language? ये हम जो कुछ कर सकते हैं, ये मद्रासी का हिंदी थोड़ा बहुत तो कर लेंगे, खींच लेंगे. We are
पूरी तरह से आपके साथ हूँ. मुझे तो कोई इसमें दिक्कत नहीं है. मैं तो हिंदी, मराठी, गुजराती तीनों भाषाओं में बोल सकता हूँ.
हमें कहीं ना कहीं से तो शुरुआत करना है. सबको ब्लेम करके हम खुद ही लोग बदले नहीं तो क्या करेंगे?
वो मतलब अकेला वही एक मुद्दा नहीं है कि भाई केवल अंग्रेजी भाषा के कारण डिजिटल डिवाइड होगा, ये बात नहीं है. लोगों के पास इक्विपमेंट नहीं होता, कनेक्टिविटी नहीं होती, पावर नहीं होती, ये भी इश्यूज आते हैं. लेकिन सब लोग इस पर बात कर सकते हैं अगर उन्हें उसमें कुछ उद्देश्य दिखाई पड़े. If they can see something that they can achieve by using the technology, people look. That's how women have learned to use Zoom. No, and they do press the right buttons.
And this, Sanjiv, I don't want to get into a debate on that. I like the benefit of Bharti and Saumitra's comments. But if you were to take a corollary of what Singapore did, while not being a regional language, which is Chinese, and Singapore also had Tamil as a third language and Malay for some other people, for the indigenous communities, they made all the correspondence or methodology of engagement in English. We also have to realize we are competing in a global market, not necessarily in a domestic market. If you take the journey of any individual, whether it is Punjab or Kerala, they would all want to go from one end of the spectrum to other. And whether we, even as of today, the global connected language, despite 15 or 20 odd UN languages that might exist, it's still English. So we can't do a regional language at the cost of English. It has to be in addition to English. That's what my view would be, rather than saying that English is bad and I will not speak. Fine, we might have our own biases, but it should really we should push the envelope and boundaries of. I agree with Bharti. If you're starting as a regional language, thinking first, your entire construct of your web design or your product offering will be very different as compared to thinking of an English first customer or this thing. So it's a very different thinking, right? From like a conventional website to a mobile first construct. The Zoom in an iPad looks very different from Zoom in a desktop even today. So
I'll unfortunately have to move us along on because there is a session on technology, but broadly I agree. I mean, because we could speak about that for another hour. But I do agree that there is both an issue of translation and a language barrier, and two products and services designed for the rural population. A lot of design is focused on people like us, right? Bharti, there's a question for you, I think, from Sneha. Ma'am painted a picture of integrated development as it seems. Is there no other way? And then she's completed that question saying that the question is how can we, or what does it take to converge efforts of development organizations and government working in different themes to bring this integration? And it kind of alludes to, in a way, point that you made, Venkat, of hyper collaboration. So how do we get people everyone is well-meaning. They have the same intentions. Still collaboration is not happening. How do you get that to happen? Question for you, Bharti, from Sneha.
So I think TIRF is a in some ways the platform for doing this. It was set up with the intention of bringing all these players together to address the issues at the ground level in an integrated manner. And I think what we found over the last 5 years of TRIF's existence is that it can be done. It requires an enormous amount of energy. Not everybody will see the benefit of somebody anchoring this effort, but an anchor, a very strong anchor is required. So you need an anchor who thinks that collaboration is the magic potion, so to speak. You then need them to go out and get government involved, because they are really the big elephant in the room. And then you need all the other bits and pieces which are necessary to move the program along. And as I said, I think the whole TRF experience has been that it does work, and more power to all of you to make it work.
Soumitra, I'll add to what Bharti
please
mentioned. This a few times we had discussed also in some of the other meetings. In attempting to collaborate, all of us would have to let go many of our own notions. And normally we try to get to a HCF of engagement, highest common factor of, look, I need all of this. What all can you give or don't give? Instead of a HCF, can we try the LCM? What is the least common multiple of association rather than a highest common factor of engagement? It is not necessarily a win-win. What is that lose-lose arrangement that all the parties can live with? It's a very different construct from many of the commercial constructs that we see elsewhere. So when we, from a grassroots perspective, whether a person in rural India or in urban, he really doesn't care from where his benefit is coming from. Today, it might be coming from X party, Y donor, Z donor, is completely agnostic. These are all completely migratory birds, like your SIM card today. You can be of one operator today and another operator tomorrow. But if you're able to engage on a common metrics, which, for example, platforms like Internet Sati work brilliantly, in a sense, we had only 2 metrics which we evaluated, like number of women getting covered, number of villages getting covered. We didn't overbrain on how the local partner was trying to do X or Y or Z. In the financial sector or in business community, irrespective of which business or industry you are, chartered accountants tell you, look, this is where your balance sheet and profit and loss should be. There is absolutely no change. So it becomes very easy for external donors and everyone to evaluate. So even if you take SDG goals, each one's definition of what an SDG goals is very different when it comes to an operational metrics of framing the what it is. So therefore, when we try to get to an LCM approach, many things automatically disappear. And we've been in the trust very fortunate to have collaborations with the Premji Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and many other donors, both in India and abroad, attempting to take this approach, which we're very grateful for all of them to have considered us worthy of such an association. And platforms like TRIF are a classic example for this. While it might have been incubated by trust, but it has a multi-stakeholder involvement at the grassroots, as well as quote unquote at the cap table or at the methodology of engagement, so to speak.
Thank you. Sanjiv, maybe I'll get you here because we spoke of inequities, and at least, I spoke about women, tribals, Dalits. There's a question on, on old people in villages, and you spoke about some of it. So I know you do a lot of work on that area. So how do we address that issue? How big is this issue of an aging population in villages, especially with migration of youth? And what are some of your thoughts in terms of how that could be, addressed?
Very important issue and very close to my heart, given that I have crossed 60 myself. So the question of how does one look for elderly is a very important issue. Now in the rural areas, elderly, it's a major problem that is emerging. And longevity increases, life expectancy increases, even in rural India. We have more and more elderly left out there. And their young children, either they migrate or they're too poor to look after. So there is a major problem there. So, there's some excellent initiatives were taken, and I guess you people have heard of Caring Friends, and Nimesh Bhai, who runs that, started this wonderful initiative where the local self-help group in the respective village is kind of encouraged to look after the elderly in that village, particularly the elderly who don't have their children with them. And essentially, sometimes you need just food, because they don't have enough income and they don't have capacity. Their motor abilities may be reduced. So at least khana pahuncha do taki wo rahenge. Another beautiful initiative that came about was by Johnny Oman in his area, and living with dignity, aging with dignity. That was the program called. And young people, young ladies of the village were encouraged to go spend time with the elderly. No, after all, I mean, my father is 95, and one of the major demands which he has is come and sit with me and spend some time with me. He's looked after physically and so on, security, etc. No issue, but he wants people to spend time. So both these issues, and of course, health access in rural areas for almost everybody is pathetic, but for the elderly, it's particularly terrible. So we need to look at these three aspects. How do we provide for the health care of the people, and therefore build a cadre of ASHA or women like ASHA who will provide that health care, at least the basic level health care and attendance to them. Second, how do you ensure that they get their food, nutritious, whatever, meal in time, even if they can't afford. And third is how do we allow them to age with dignity. These are the three major issues. And that number is increasing, by the way, because of the larger life expectancy all over.
Sanjiv, thanks. And, I think, of course, very, very relevant, both in rural, urban India. Good suggestion, great suggestions, in fact. And the word that kind of resonates with me is dignity, because that can be applied to all the developmental work that's been done, right? Irrespective of whether you're working with any population set or in any sector. So thank you, Sanjiv. I know we'll not get through all the questions, so I will check with Anish if there is a way, we'll try and actually put some of the answers online. I think question for you, let me get you in, Venkat. There's a question for you from Ankita. You have somewhere spoken about donor landscape hindering and not always supporting to achieve transformational change. What can be done to make our donors aspirational, or what can donors do differently in terms of supporting transformational change? And also, I mean, like where you've seen some of that happen, right? I mean, because there will be some examples and positive.
I think like some of the new age or new generation donors, I mentioned the example of Mackenzie Scott, which is kind of unrestricted grant and enabling the grassroots organizations to thrive based on what in their own judgment seems appropriate, rather than overbraining at a junior program officer level as to what needs to be done, not done, right up. We all know in a typical grant cycle, it can take as early as 9 months. In some of around been a little more than that as well, from the money getting disbursed, so to speak. And once it gets disbursed, also the periodic monitoring, and you need to create, Anish knows this, where you need to create a whole army and cavalry for compliance with respect to what the donor is asking every single time. Even in some of the most top-notch companies, whatever business plan you prepare, it doesn't tally to the last T with respect to what you have achieved. There is always differences between line items between revenue and capital to revenue type of construct. It requires a different degree of trust from a construct of, look, everybody is a crook until proven otherwise, to vis-a-vis saying, look, I trust XYZ. In the event of someone doing a malpractice, you go after them ruthlessly, even to the extent of saying, look, I can put you in jail or file a criminal complaint with respect to misappropriation. But having checks and in the name of checks and balances, to put in a process which constrains a grassroots organization is what, from a mind space, several of them are doing it. I wouldn't say they're not doing it. Several of them are doing it. Obviously, from a donor landscape also, they're also dealing with external money. They also have a fiduciary responsibility. So it is not an either or, but an appreciation of each one's side is. I also seen grassroots organizations where suddenly when the CEO/founder of the organization was going in a cycle, next day morning he goes in a car. Boss, mere ko XYZ ka paisa aa gaya. Now I've arrived in life type of construct. We have seen both extremes too. So in that sense, there needs to be a balance between both expectations, so to speak?
Thank you. I mean, there's a question requests 4 bullet points from all of you about changes you would like to see in the existing administrative setup in rural India. So maybe all of you are, may not be 4, but like 2, 3 things, because we spoke about, right, and Bharti, you spoke about the third layer of the government. People spoke about community involvement. So what could be done to fire that up? And probably that'll be the last, because we are at 6:56, and I want to end on time.
I'll probably start off, Bharti, if it's okay.
Yeah.
The 2, 3 things was, in my view, one, we need to have a consistent ontology or nomenclature of what we define. Suppose in rural, the health related boundaries of what the health department does is very different from the revenue department boundaries to the general administration boundaries in terms of the target set or population. And this also is not mapped to your political boundaries. So if you have people like Dr. Subbu Subramaniam of Harvard have done phenomenal work on mapping the development indicators with respect to the political alignment, so to speak, will be a great boon if we are able to get those indicators right. Second, even in administration, across states and across countries, very different. In the East and Northeast, you have what a divisional commissioner or a deputy commissioner type of language systems. In South, you have collector and additional collector type of nomenclature. And different states have their own versions of what it is. There is a Jilla Parishad CEO, there is a deputy CEO, all sorts of things where many of them are, again, going back to the British time. The notion collector itself was collection of land revenue. So where is the land and where is the revenue today? That doesn't even constitute 5% of revenue of a state today or a district today. So if one were to take a significant governance reform, and I sincerely hope I see in some of the panels very eminent people from the government on those panels, if we address this holistically, so we have a standard ontology and nomenclature of development, it will solve a variety of problems. Because simple thing like 2 or 3 days ago, there was a definition of what is rural in Maharashtra vis-a-vis what is rural in Tamil Nadu is very different from what is rural in Bihar. It seems in Bihar, 90% of state is rural. In Tamil Nadu, 70% is rural. Maharashtra, 69% is rural, classified as rural. Whereas the reality is very different in most of those places.
So I actually, I'm in one of my consulting stints, I used to actually work on organization design. And if you look at the sarkari apparatus at the ground level in India, you can easily see, you don't have to be any organization expert to see, it's actually a patchwork. As patchwork where new needs have been sort of, if you like, layered on the old ones. So you had the collectorate, which is what Venkat just explained, which was really to collect revenue. That was the main system, and it continues to be the main system. Then there's the whole BDOs, the development stuff came in. And so then you have the block development things happening, and that comes in. Then you have, the Panchayati Raj comes in, and that comes in, and there are some efforts at trying to make all these things work. So actually what we need, I mean, if you're looking for change, is for somebody to say the village is a unit that we want to try and figure out what to do with. And it needs to be, the entire apparatus of the government needs to come to a point where there is one person accountable for what's happening in that village. And not, 43 people, none of whom are accountable for anything. So, I mean, we are talking about, I mean, I'm not sure I can come up with 4 things. I think there's only one thing, which is to actually have actual metrics and accountability for, at the level of a zilla, a block, and a village. Sorry, that may be very impractical, but that's what it is.
I think we have to be aspirational, as Venkat said, right?
Sorry, Samitra. Just one thing also, it's reminded of what Bharti mentioned. See, even at a governance framework, many things happen when the actual governance comes to the grassroots. So while we may all talk about Maud bin Tughlaq of trying to transform or get capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, there was a method in madness. If you look at in hindsight, we also have seen today, if the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister were to visit our street, overnight street will be cleaned. Any pothole will be up and running, absolutely right. And at one point of time, we had encouraged Mr. Nitin Gadkari to drive from Impal to Kohima, which used to take 8 hours. Now that road is less than 4 hours. So governance will automatically, or rather development will automatically happen if governance is seen and perceived to be done at the grassroots. And we often used to see leaders in the old movies, a newsreel used to come as to which leader went where and how. Today we see that connect completely missing, or rather, we don't know. It might still be happening. We really don't know to what extent it's happening. And people also need to see and perceive that in flesh and blood, not helicopter or some aerial type of visits, literally roughing it out in things. But today, many things that look, if you have arrived in parliament or become a MLA, you have arrived in life with an SUV and 4 guards behind and with a carrier vehicle. So that will automatically transform many of the elements which we look at from a governance framework. Sorry to hijack, Sanjiv.
No worries. Thanks. Sanjiv, the last word.
I don't know whether it's the last word, but yeah, for this session, I think the best thing, the best thing that could happen is if the government started trusting people whom they call the beneficiaries of the scheme. Almost every scheme is so designed and implemented that they actually distrust. Why I should not do this is the easy answer which the officer doing that gets. In fact, one of the chaps who had come to attend our programs, and he was chief secretary of Odisha, told me that, no, this is the way our systems are designed. That why this application, why should I reject it? That's the focus. So I find 20 reasons why it can be rejected. If you can flip and say, look, I'll trust him. And there may be 5-10. In any case, there is a 5-10-20% leakage that is happening, and we know much larger in many cases. So if we trust people, that probably will speed up a whole lot of things. We have a whole case study about how a disabled person who does not have a hand has to go through some 39 steps in order to prove that he does not have a hand, and therefore can be given a pass for using the state transport buses without ticket. Now, it is so obvious that he does not have a hand, but yet he has to go through these 39 steps. So can we start trusting people for a change? If we can.
Sanjay, again, on a lighter note, not just government was once, along with Mr. Tata, we were in New York. We were sitting in the counter of Wells Fargo Bank. Mr. Tata is sitting in front of the manager. He had to prove that he was Mr. Tata, though he had his ID, XYZ. He had everything in his piece of hand, but the system did not have. He said, look, you might be Mr. Ratan Tata, you might be showing an ID that you are Mr. Ratan Tata, but in my system, you are not Ratan Tata. Please prove me that you are Ratan Tata. So it was a crazy encounter for 2 hours plus in one of the most advanced banks in the US. So it is not just government and private sector also is equally good or bad in terms of proving your identity.
No, it's a large system. It's a large system issue. I think it's
But I think, conversation for another day, but I think, Venkat, you touched on trust, right? Donors not trusting NGOs, government not trusting the citizenry. So I think it's a conversation for another day, but in terms of how do we build a more trusting or trust-based society. But I think, for now, I think we are over time. Great conversation. Thank you to the three of you for participating, sharing your thoughts openly. And thank you, Anish, for giving me this opportunity. I'm sure the audience liked it. There's a bunch of questions. Not all of it have been answered. So, Anish, over to you to close it out.
Oh, hey, the way you ended, trust. And I'm reminded of 2 books, Low Trust by Akar Patel and Red Tape by Akhil. We must look at that. And those are 2 fabulous pieces to show where we are going wrong or right, whatever may be the case. Soumitra, thank you very much, and all the panelists. I was looking at the numbers, and my colleagues have given me the numbers are amazing. And just see in terms of 41 Q&A, and we have close to 148, 149 as we speak chats. And those chats itself, each one of them are very, very engaging and illuminating. We have recorded them. We have recorded all the questions and chats also. While we put it out, this whole session video there, we'll also look to engage with everyone. And it has been such a fabulous and insightful. We have been live tweeting, and I've got such a fabulous response there also. And that's what my colleagues tell me. So thank you very much, Soumitra, Sanjiv, Venkat, Bharti, and each one of the panelists. And I would request you to join us tomorrow. And tomorrow at, we have a fabulous session at 5:30 p.m. on gender equality and justice. You have Sunita Dhar, Sarojini Ganji Thakur, and Sanjay Srivastava, and we will be talking about solutions that enable women and girls, as well as men and boys, to realize their full potential. And we will be specifically looking at from the public program lens and making more gender intentional in terms of enhancing agency, freedom, and mobility. So do join us tomorrow at the colloquy 5:30. It's a fabulous session moderated by Madhu Krishna. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Anish, if there are any questions that any of us should answer, please let us have them and you can post them back.
Yes.
Okay. Good night for everybody.
Thank you very much.
You're already speaking like you're from Manchester, not from Muzaffarpur. So thank you.
Yes. That is the point. I wear this kurta so that people don't get confused. Muzaffarpur with Manchester.
Right.
Thanks.
Right.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Soumitra, for keeping us
Thanks.
straight and narrow. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.